All right, get ready, because we're diving deep into the Enneagram today. Specifically, the sexual five.
Oh, interesting.
Now, you're probably thinking, wait, fives withdraw, they observe.
Right. That's what they're known for.
And you're right, to some degree. But the sexual five subtype, they're a whole different story.
Yeah, they really add a whole other layer to the five dynamic.
It's like this push and pull between wanting to be truly known and understood,
Yeah.
but then also being terrified of the vulnerability that comes with that.
Right. That fear of being exposed.
Exactly. And to really get this, we're going to look at it through the lens of Vaslav Nijisnky.
Oh, the dancer.
Yeah. You might know him as this legendary ballet dancer and choreographer. But what makes him even more interesting is how his life reflects the sexual five.
Wow, I'm intrigued.
So our source material actually describes him as a sexual five. And it says that he used art as this, emotional outlet, like a pressure valve almost, pouring his whole being into his dance.
So not your typical graceful ballet, huh?
No, not at all. His choreography, especially in The Rite of Spring, was revolutionary, even shocking back then.
The Rite of Spring, that's the one that caused riots, right?
Exactly. He was pushing boundaries, expressing raw emotion, and, doing things that had never been seen before in ballet.
I mean, it makes sense. To translate that much inner turmoil into physical movement, it's gotta be intense.
It's almost like he was trying to communicate something that words couldn't capture, something primal.
It really was groundbreaking for its time. But, some might say that this drive to break the mold, it's common in lots of artists, not just sexual five.
Right, good point. What makes Nijisnky stand out as specifically a sexual five?
Well, I think the key here is the motivation. It wasn't just about being different for him. It was about translating his inner world into a language everyone could understand, even if they didn't want to.
Almost like he was forcing them to confront something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bridging that gap between the chaos he felt inside and the order he craved, that's classic sexual five.
That search for connection through art. It makes me think of Chopin, actually.
Oh, yeah.
The source mentions that he's often typed as a sexual five, too.
Makes sense.
And they both poured their souls into their work.
That's a great comparison. You really see that incredible emotional depth in both Chopin's music and Nijisnky's choreography. And there's a fragility to it, like it could shatter at any moment.
It makes you wonder, was that intensity, that drive for perfection, what led to their struggles?
You mean like Nijisnky's sensitivity to criticism?
Yeah. The source mentions that he was sensitive to the point of breakdowns.
That's the double-edged sword of sensitivity for the sexual five. It fuels their genius, but also makes them incredibly vulnerable.
I can only imagine how tough that must have been for him, especially in such a public field.
Absolutely. One bad review even led to a complete breakdown for Nijisnky. He had to cancel performances.
Wow, that's intense. He must have been constantly seeking refuge and stability. The source describes him finding solace in nature, almost like going into a trance.
Right. Remember that inner conflict we talked about? Wanting connection, but fearing vulnerability? Well, it's exhausting. So he found ways to control how much he revealed, Dance became his safe space to explore his emotions, his own terms, his own narrative.
So it wasn't just about being shy or introverted.
It was deeper than that.
More about strategically revealing himself.
Exactly. Choosing when and how to share those emotions. And for Nijisnky, dance was the way he did it. It really is like walking a tightrope, that constant back and forth between revealing and concealing.
And that's something we see a lot in sexual fives.
Definitely. It's a key part of their dynamic.
So it's not just being shy.
Right.
It's more about having all these intense emotions.
And needing to carefully manage them.
Yeah. Which reminds me, the source mentioned Nijisnky's fascination with masks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Makes sense, though, right?
Totally. The mask becomes a powerful symbol for the sexual five. It allows them to express themselves. But there's still that separation.
That barrier.
Exactly. Between their true self and the outside world.
This is a part of me, they're saying, but not the whole story.
Precisely. And you see this reflected in his choreography, too. Nijisnky often used masks in his performances, obscuring the dancers' faces, creating this sense of mystery.
Ah, so it adds another layer to that idea of controlling the narrative.
Absolutely. And speaking of control, the source also highlights Nijisnky's perfectionism, especially in his work. How he often felt unprepared no matter how much he'd already accomplished.
That's so relatable. I mean, I think everyone feels that way sometimes.
True. But for a sexual five, it's amplified, almost constant.
Like it's connected to something deeper.
Yes. It's often tied to their core fear of being inadequate, unworthy of love.
So they strive for perfection to compensate for that.
Right. But it's this never-ending cycle because the goalposts keep moving.
They never really arrive.
Exactly. And this pursuit of perfection, it can manifest in different ways. The source describes Nijisnky as being incredibly demanding, even clashing with others who didn't meet his expectations.
So not just self-directed then.
Right. This need for control can spill over into their relationships.
Trying to create order in their external world.
Yeah, to match the intensity they feel internally, which, of course, can cause friction.
Especially if the other person doesn't understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And speaking of relationships, the source also dives into some of the key figures in Nijisnky's life, like his relationship with Sergei Diaghilev, his mentor and lover.
Right. Diaghilev really launched Nijisnky's career, but it sounds like Nijisnky was pretty dependent on him.
Emotionally and professionally, it's a classic example of how the sexual five idealizes and clings to certain individuals.
Looking for that soulmate.
That deep, all-consuming connection, but it comes with risks.
Because that level of dependence, it can be unhealthy, right?
Definitely. And when that relationship with Diaghilev fell apart, it was devastating for Nijisnky.
Reinforcing those core fears of abandonment.
Exactly. And that's where things can get really tricky for sexual fives. If they don't have a strong sense of self outside of their relationships.
So how can we help someone who's struggling with that? Encourage a healthier sense of independence.
That's a great question. I think it starts with helping them recognize their own inherent worth, separate from their relationships, their achievements.
Finding their own internal compass.
Exactly. And reminding them that true connection, it comes from a place of wholeness, not needing someone else to complete them.
Now, the source also mentions Nijisnky's wife, Romola.
Right.
She seemed to provide a different kind of support, more grounded, more stable.
Romola's devotion was incredible, even as his mental health declined. She really represents that other side of the sexual five's relationship needs, the desire for a safe and reliable connection.
Someone who offers unconditional love and support.
Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? Diaghilev and Romola, they represent those two extremes for the sexual five.
That pull between intensity and stability.
Passion and security. Finding a healthy balance between the two is crucial.
This all paints a pretty complex picture of the sexual five. And we haven't even gotten to Nijisnky's spiritual yearnings.
Or his descent into schizophrenia.
Right.
That's where we'll explore how Nijisnky's spiritual seeking and the challenges he faced in integrating his inner world with reality offer further insights into the depths of the sexual five.
So we were talking about these two contrasting figures in Nijisnky's life, Diaghilev and Romola, and how their relationships with him kind of reflect those different ways the sexual five might seek connection.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that even with Romola, offering stability in Nijisnky's internal world, it was still really turbulent.
Right.
Which brings us to another layer of the sexual five, their spiritual seeking.
Yeah, the source mentions that Nijisnky, he wasn't satisfied with the shallowness, I guess, of the ballet world.
Right.
Like he was searching for something deeper, a connection with the divine.
And that yearning for something bigger than themselves, it's pretty common among sexual fives. They often feel like they don't quite fit in here.
So they look to spirituality and philosophy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For that sense of belonging, of transcendence.
It's almost a paradox, though, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, they want this deep connection with another person, but they also feel so different from everyone else.
That's the core of the sexual five struggle. Longing for that soulmate, someone who sees them, but then also fearing that true connection might be impossible.
Like your inner world is just too much.
Too complex, too intense. They worry no one could ever grasp it.
So they're stuck, seeking and withdrawing, longing and fearing.
Right.
And with Nijisnky, it seems like that conflict really manifested in a tragic way.
His schizophrenia.
Yeah. Spending decades in and out of institutions. The source talks about his diaries from that period, filled with mystical ramblings, these disconnected thoughts.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. To see his brilliant mind unravel like that.
I mean, we can't say his Enneagram type caused his schizophrenia, of course.
He's not.
But it's clear that his intense inner life, his sensitivity, those struggles with reality, they played a part.
Like his inner world became too much to handle.
Yeah, too much to reconcile with everyday life. And it reminds us that the sexual five's intensity, their depth, it's a gift for sure. But it comes with responsibility, too.
A responsibility to care for themselves.
Exactly. Their mental and emotional well-being.
So what can we learn from all this? What advice would you give to someone, maybe someone who identifies as a sexual five, or maybe even just someone who sees these patterns in a loved one?
Well, first, it's about acknowledging that intensity, that depth. Don't try to downplay their feelings. Don't tell them to lighten up.
Right, right.
Instead, encourage them to find healthy outlets for their emotions.
Like art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
creative expression, music, writing, even just spending time in nature, anything that helps them tap into that inner world, channel it in a constructive way.
And what about that need for deep connection, that search for a soulmate?
That's where encouraging a strong sense of self-worth comes in, outside of their relationships. Remind them that they are complete on their own, not dependent on finding that perfect partner.
It's finding that balance, right?
Yeah,
Between connection and autonomy.
absolutely. And don't underestimate professional support. Therapy can be incredibly valuable for sexual fives. It gives them a safe space to explore, to develop coping mechanisms.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Nijisnky's life and what it reveals about the sexual five, what are your final thoughts? What should we take away from this?
I think Nijinski's story, with all its highs and lows, it reminds us that even the most brilliant, most gifted people, they're still human.
They're not immune to struggle.
Exactly. They have vulnerabilities, their path isn't always smooth, and it's a call for compassion, for understanding.
Recognizing that we all have our own ways of navigating this crazy world.
And maybe, just maybe, by understanding these nuances like the sexual five, we can appreciate the beauty and the complexity of the human experience in all its forms.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the sexual five, through the fascinating life of Vaslav Nijisnky. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little inspiring. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the messiness of being human.